Fry dough, beignets, bannock, and many other names, depending on your country of origin, describe what we're cooking today. Out on the prairie in a ramshackle cabin or on a wagon train, I suspect some version of this was eaten. Everything was cooked over the campfire. When we were halfway to California, some of the trains ahead would leave sacks of lovely hams and sides of bacon by the side of the road for anyone that wanted them. We supposed their cattle had died or had become so worn out that they could not haul the heavy load any longer, so they had to lighten them by leaving them. No doubt they wished many times they had them again, but of course it must have been the only thing they could do to save their lives. This letter fell out of a box this week, a box of old mining claims and passports. I'm gonna warn you, the letter is tragic, full of wild risks, and it is not politically correct, at least not by today's standards. But it is a beautiful first-hand tale of a child coming west on a wagon train in 1840s America. That is so early, so dangerous. It's the time of the gold rush, and some in this letter don't end up making it. Right now, here in 2025, it is blisteringly cold in Montana. We are weeks into now sub-zero, fluctuating temperatures, so we're hunkered down and dreaming of summer. I thought we could reach back to those warmer days and fry donuts over the campfire. And while we do that, read this freshly discovered letter, written by an old woman from her bed to her 2 young great-grandchildren. My dear John and Dick, I'm going to write you both at one time, as it is too hard for me to write you separately. When I was your age, John, in 1849, we started across the plains to California, with wagons drawn by oxen. We had horses with us, but they were not strong enough to haul the wagons so far. Of course, the trip was a picnic to me. I think I must have walked halfway and drove the team. We had a long tongue to the wagon, and the end that was attached to the wagon was broad and flat, so it made a splendid seat. When I got tired of walking, I would go between the oxen and the wagon and sit there until I was rested. We had 100 families in our train, and we wanted to travel until we found a place to camp with grass and water, especially water. When all the wagons got there, they would form a circle, and we would put our tents and cooking utensils in there. They made the circle on account of the Indians, for the men said they could guard us better from being surprised by them. The Indians did not trouble us much. Once they stampeded our cattle and drove off 3 or 4 of them. They had beautiful ponies. Once a band rode up and told my father if he would let them have me, they would give him his choice of ponies. Of course, my father would not let them have me, but just think, boys, if he had. I might be a wild Indian squaw, and that would be terrible for me.
Okay, so we've got the hot oil going. The donuts are coming. Our first test one is well cooked, and that's good enough for me. Now it's time for more. Helps to have an old set of gloves and 2 quiet kids, who I'm very proud of, to do this. I don't know what temperature this oil is. All I know is that it's right. I'm sure this is the sort of recipe a pioneer, when he was building this house the first time, he probably camped out here with his family. And this is probably the sort of food they would have cooked. After all, they didn't have an oven yet. They didn't have a cook stove. So something like frying over an open fire, yeah, that's probably how they cooked. And something like yeast bread dough, that's probably something they had. I don't know if you'd call these true donuts or beignets or what. They don't really have much sugar in them, but what they do have is the ability to put sugar on them. And that's kind of what we're gonna do. So once these guys are done, we will roll them in cinnamon sugar, and then we have plum jam from our own plum tree, right guys?
Yep, from our own plum tree.
I'm curious to dip these in that and see how that tastes.
When we got to the Green River, We had to make rafts to take the wagons over, but they had to let the horses and cattle swim. One man rode his horse, but the river was so swift that they were both drowned. I saw them, and I've always been so sorry that I did. In early days, they did not have caps for their guns, but used a hard, almost transparent stone that they called flint. Sometimes the men would start a fire by taking a stone and striking the flint, and the sparks from it would kindle the fire. They would use this method often to make fires on the trail. We saw more Indians after we got here than we did on the plains. Aunt Lou was the brave one of the family. One day, 8 or 10 Indians come to our cabin where we had stopped when we first got here, and they wanted us to give them provisions. Aunt Lou saw them coming and got a gun, and when some of them acted ugly, starting into the house, she pointed the gun at them, and how they did run. They never troubled us again, and they always stayed on the other side of the river. Aunt Lou had never fired a gun, but said she would if it was necessary. We always kept one loaded. I drove up the Sierra Nevada mountains, and it was so steep, the team had to stop to rest every few yards. We carried large sticks of wood with us, and when they would stop to rest, we'd put one under each wheel so the wagon would not roll down the hill. I watched where the men drove their teams, and when my time came, the men said, "You better let me drive. You will be sure to get stalled." But I said no, I would do it myself, and I would get out all right, which I did. The men said, "Well, I'll be hanged." I knew how to avoid the bad places by watching the others. Now my boys always watch the young and the old people to see if they are good and honest and behave themselves respectfully at all times. And if so, they are worthy of you to follow their example. And if not, shun them as if they were poison. Never have anything to do with them. I want my dear boys to be brave and true and be an example for their companions. I hope you will be. I am 83 years old and am writing this in bed with great effort, and I want you to always remember what your great-grandmother says to you. These beignets proved to be a feast for the whole family. Grandma and Grandpa finished their work on the ranch and came out to join us.
Sounds great. Oh, do you mean on?
What does caffeine do to you?
Next up, peach pie in the Dutch oven over the campfire. Campfire cooking was the way of life on a wagon train. Some would have been talented at it, some would have only known the basics. By the end of the trail, no doubt, they were experts. And when they arrived on the coast or wherever they found to permanently stop, their goal would have been to leave the campfire behind and get themselves a proper cook stove. Not unlike those before us, this campfire cooking was how we got through summer when rebuilding the 1889 homestead cabin this year. That was a heck of a journey in itself. Obviously, I'm no expert at campfire cooking, which is an art and a science, but frying over the open fire and this stage of work has led to the next stage, which has been the wood-fired cook stove. That I've experienced for a decade prior, and I've been building confidence on it as we've cooked some amazing meals in this cabin. From elk bourguignon to molasses drop cakes to biscuits and pies, and there's more to come. We do our best here to tell stories and keep them from being forgotten. The cholera broke out on the trains in the front and the back of us, and we saw a great many graves by the side of the road. We had several cases in our train also. There was a young man by the name of Crowder. He slept in one of our tents and had his meals with us. When he was taken with the disease, everyone was so frightened that my father and mother took him quite a distance from the camp. My mother was as good as any doctor and a splendid nurse. They did all in their power to save him, but he only lived 2 days. They pitched their tent under a tree, which fortunately had bark on it. My father and mother had the men come and take the bark off, and then they carefully wrapped him in sheets, placed him in the bark for a coffin, and tied it securely. They had a deep grave dug, so the wild animals could not get to him. My mother was a Christian, and I feel sure she said prayers over him before she left him there. And I know if his mother could have seen what tender care he had, she would have thanked God he had fallen into such kind hands. I often think of the lonely graves left in the great silence far away, in the desert, and the many mothers who had boys or girls buried there. Well, God will watch over them until the resurrection morn, when we all shall appear before him. I did not think it so much of a picnic as I did when we first started to California. But boys, those graves are a silent reminder that that is the end of all on earth. God says, "Dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." I see I have repeated here, but I cannot take the time to copy the whole page over, so I will scratch it out. We had a colored man named Bob. He begged my father to bring him, so he let him come with us. I called him colored, but he was quite black. But boys, he had as white a heart as any man that ever walked the earth. After my mother's death, he took such good care of me and petted me that I felt just as safe with him as I did with my father. There were 4 girls in our family: Josephine, who afterward married G.B. Montgomery; Louisa married Judge R.B. Buckner; Mary married A.P. Anderson; and Julia, Thomas Bodley, a lawyer. And Bob was thoughtful to all of us. After we had been here a short time, my father bought him a farm near Santa Clara. Bob went with us, lived with us for many years, and is now buried near San Jose. Dear old Bob of precious memory. We were 6 months on the way. The rainy season had started in, and the streams were so full when we reached here that my father decided to stop for a short time. He got a log cabin at a place called Fidel's Bar, quite a distance from Marysville. I'm not sure, but I think they call it Orville now. A few days before we arrived here, Bob was taken sick with typhoid, and my mother took care of him. Then my sister Mary, she had it, and then I took it, and my mother nursed us all. Finally, she was taken with it too, but she was so worn out that she could not resist the disease, and my darling mother died in a strange land. I do not remember how she looked in life. I had been so sick I could not stand. So lovely I remember my father lifting me up to see and kiss her goodbye in her coffin. And now I always see her as I did the last time. Her black hair, eyebrows, and long eyelashes, and her sweet, beautiful, pale face. And now she's buried on the hill across the Father River, a beautiful, lonely spot. But she sleeps there just as sweetly as if she was in a marble palace. Afterward, one of my uncles was buried beside her, and that is why we never had her body removed. My father went to visit her grave and said a beautiful tree was growing at the head of her grave, the only tree on the hill. Oh, my dear grandchildren, how sad and lonely I felt without my dear mother. No mother to put her arms around me and love me, and how I wish I had. My mother died when I was your age, John. And now you have your father and mother, grandpa and grandma, so cherish and love them. Let them place their arms around you and love you while you have them with you. You will wish you had them in the years to come. John and Dick, if you will commence now, you can be great and influential men. Have people look at you as an example. Would not that be splendid, just by every day to do better? And if you do, I know the result. You will succeed. John, you write to me, for you and for Dick. Write whatever he wants to say. Write a little every day for a week. Well, my head and my hands are tired, so I will not write any more. Great-grandma expects great things of her dear boys. I know you will not disappoint me. God bless and keep you. Your affectionate great-grandma, Bodley, Julia Bodley. My grandfather, who died before I ever knew him, was Dick, the youngest boy written to in this letter. How many stories like this are in our families, yours and mine? The great American adventures and struggles. This bundle of papers was in a box of old passports and mining claims, destined to be discarded. My good cousin sent the box to me this week. With a little luck, this letter fell out and was found. I've read it 3 times through, none of which without tearing up. This country was built by our ancestors through great risk and hardship. Hardship including death, in hopes of a better life. But the day-to-day of life carried on. The trail was a slow progression of moving one step at a time, cooking meals along the way, one meal at a time. Thanks for being with us inside and outside this old cabin, rescuing little bits of history. As the plaque on the outside of the house says, tell your children stories, and tell them again when they forget. God willing, we'll see you next week.
Could I try?
Sure, just gently sprinkle it over the top. See if it'll stick to it. And then once it sticks, knock the extra off. Put it right there. Do the next batch.